So we're giving you proof of you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome. We're still in the September meeting of the British Empire Study Group. I'm happy that everyone could attend. That's Steve's line, by the way, not mine. So the British Empire Study Group, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is we're a bunch of men and women, and we get together because we like philately and we enjoy social aspects. We will be meeting online and ad hoc. If you see someone at a stamp show, feel free to go up to them and say, "Hey, I've seen you on the screen." So we have a very liberal definition of the British Empire. If it flew over the British Empire, if it was once part of the British Empire, if the British delivered mail to it, it's all fair game. So we're pretty good. Our next meeting is on Thursday, October 13th, and that's the first 2 issues of Burma with Mike Lay. That should be very interesting. He's a very knowledgeable guy, so I encourage you to join us on the 13th. So a couple of housekeeping issues. If you have any questions during this webinar, it is a webinar, so you can't just interrupt us. You could put them in the Q&A button, so that way we could see them and filter them out. You're welcome to use the chat for any technical questions that you may have. Now, a new feature in Zoom, if you don't like the chat, because a lot of people don't like those little things coming up, if you hit the little hat, you could turn off the notifications, which is really helpful if you're someone who doesn't like to chat. So the next thing I'd like to tell you about is the subtitles. If you're seeing subtitles and transcriptions and you find them annoying, you could just turn those off by just disabling the subtitles.
Joan, some people are noticing that they don't have sound. I think they have to check their system to make sure that they should just check to make sure they hadn't inadvertently muted themselves. So that's all. I just want to say that. That's all.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No one could, if you can't hear us on that, that is usually on your end, because I could hear them. I could turn on this. I'll know in a minute if you can hear everybody, but anyway, let me get off this. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rob Lutyens, who's my cohort and very, very helpful. So a lot of the stuff that gets done, you're looking at Rob here, and Rob will introduce tonight's speakers. So take it away, Rob.
Good evening. Welcome to the British Empire Study Group presentation. Everything you ever wanted to know about stamp catalogs, but were afraid to ask. At the dawn of the age of industrialization, demographics were rapidly changing. People were leaving the farm and rural life to move to the cities to gain employment somewhere within the newly forming industries. Some people made the move while others stayed home. This revolutionary phenomenon created physical distance between people and their families. Remaining in communication with one another was critical, but a medium was needed to support this need on a scale that hadn't been seen earlier. So enter the postage stamp and the changes it created on a global scale. As postal communication increased, so did the tools of the post, namely the global issuance of postage stamps, which brings us to our topic today. An astute young man named Stanley Gibbons recognized the growing level of interest in this new medium, and from a modest beginning, made a business out of cataloging and selling stamps that's grown into the firm that we're familiar with today. Here to tell us more about Stanley Gibbons and catalogs in general are this evening's presenters, Hugh Jefferies and Steve Zirinsky. Now, a little background about each of our speakers. Hugh Jefferies. Hugh was born in Berlin in May 1948. He joined Stanley Gibbons in 1975. And in 1988 became editor of the Gibbons Stamp Monthly. In 2003, he became the editor of the Stanley Gibbons Catalog, and in 2015, he was made a member of the Order of the British Empire for services to philately. Jefferies is a trustee of the Bath Postal Museum, a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society of London, and a member of the Ferndown and West Moors Philatelic and Postcard Club. Steven Zirinsky. Steven's involvement with philately began at the age of 10, when his father dropped several thousand stamps in his lap one day and said, "Here, sort these." He's now 63, an architect with his own full-time practice in New York, and has a focus on his recent commercial mail usages from smaller islands in the Atlantic and Pacific. This eventually led to an interest in local overprints. Steve's currently a member of more than 20 different philatelic societies, a member of the Pacific Island Study Group for the past 30 years, secretary of the Fellowship of Samoan Specialists for the last 20 years, and president of the Society of Australasian and Oceania Specialists for more than 10 years, and a director of the British Caribbean Study Group for the last couple of years. So without further ado, here are this evening's presenters, Hugh Jefferies and Steven Zirinsky.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Joan. Hugh, I'm very happy to be able to finally have this opportunity to have a conversation with you about this. And the impetus for this was, for me, was that the catalogs have always seemed like an ivory tower. But to many people, I tell them, well, I discover stamps and I put them in, I knock on the door of the various catalogs and I open up the door and they accept my stamps and my offerings and these stamps, these little pieces of paper suddenly get listed. And I never thought of it as an ivory tower. I always thought it was something very accessible. And I noticed there's a big difference in attitude about how catalogs and cataloging is interpreted or is experienced. And I thought, well, it'd be a good idea to break some walls down and why not talk? So that's the reason for my thinking that this would be a good little entertainment piece, like Entertainment Tonight. But anyway, so I guess I should ask you a little bit. I know you, Hugh, for being the editor of Stanley, of the new issues, certainly for Stanley Gibbons, and also I think probably everything going back to the 1840s. So I'm going to ask you perhaps, what to you makes a catalog, and how do you how did you get involved in it to begin with? Just to start with that. I mean,
Okay, well, I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to chat to you, Steve, and obviously everybody else who's listening. I also shared that view that the catalogue was something of an ivory tower. I first joined Stanley Gibbons back in '75 in a completely non-philatelic role. And it was only over time that I kept saying to management, I collect stamps, I could be doing more related to stamps. And I think I was first asked to write an article for the magazine in about 1980, and gradually things developed and I became editor of Gibbons Stamp Monthly in '88. And I really enjoyed that because I'd been a reader of that magazine for, well, since I was about 9, I think. And so it gave me something really to get my teeth into and to try and produce what I thought at the time was the best philatelic magazine it could possibly be. I had no expectation of ever working on the stamp catalogue, but my predecessor as catalogue editor, David Aggersberg, came up for retirement, and nobody else seemed to be very interested in taking on the work. So I volunteered, and they said, well, you can't edit the magazine and the catalogue at the same time. That would be ridiculous. I said, no, of course I couldn't. And then I spent the next 10 years editing the magazine and the catalogue at the same time. Eventually, I did come up for my 65th birthday, and I had an excuse to retire from something. So I passed on the editorship of the magazine, but I carried on editing the Great Britain and the Commonwealth sections of the catalogue. About 4 or 5 years ago, I handed over the Great Britain aspect of the catalogue, or most of it, and I now deal with just the the Commonwealth countries. Now, my main interest is in the part 1, which of course only goes up to 1970. That's most of the period that I'm interested in collecting myself. So that's fine. But I do also still try and keep the catalogues up to date. So we're just, sorry, do beg your pardon, just getting over COVID. So there will be a few coughs and splutters here and there, I'm afraid. We are about to start work on a Central Africa catalogue. So we need to try and update our listings of countries like Malawi and Zambia and Zimbabwe. Now, those countries I don't collect because my own collection stops at 1980. So the new issues I don't collect myself, but I need to try and make sense of them. We still buy all the new issues as far as we're able to. So every new set that would come out from those countries, we would need to acquire to put into our reference collection in perpetuity.
Well, don't worry about Zambia. They haven't issued anything for 5 years.
Sorry?
Don't worry about Zambia. They haven't issued anything for 5 years.
No, Zambia's okay. Malawi's done a few bits and pieces though, hasn't it? And other countries, well, that they vary from churning them out like there's no tomorrow to, well, nothing issued for 10 years. And then they'll spring something on you.
Right. You had mentioned to me at one point that you had you had a relatively good supply through new issue dealers that they were able to maintain. So you were able to get a handle on what was out there. But
Yeah.
apparently there's been a change in the last couple of years, as far as you see it.
Well, I look back in the files at the at what the catalogue editor was doing in the 1950s and 60s. Sorry. And I think I look back with a lot of jealousy. First of all, there were very few stamp issues coming out in the first place, and you could study everything with you know, you have plenty of time to study stuff. You could check minor shade changes, whether there was a little flaw on one stamp in the sheet. You had time for all that. Sorry. Added to which, apart from the fact that the philatelic bureaus and the post offices all seemed to be run pretty efficiently in those days. So you could write to the Postmaster General of Nigeria and you'd get an answer pretty much straight away telling you what was being issued. There were also a lot of expatriate stamp collectors still living in the former empire territories. So they would tell you what was going on. And if the Postmaster General told you that the 2 shilling stamp was going to be issued on the 30th of November, then you could bet that there would be somebody from up country who would say, haha, it came out in the 1st of October. So we had great sources of information in those days. And unfortunately, it's not as easy now. Sorry, I do beg your pardon. But yes, it's part of the fun trying to keep up to date with the new issues, that's for sure.
Okay, I'm gonna.
No, I'm fine.
And I guess my next question is,
What are you doing?
can background. How do you view Gibbon's world in the stamp universe versus, say, Scott or Mikkel, or do you not even worry about it? You just go off and do what Gibbon should do? And I mean, do you compare yourself to anybody else particularly, or you just see what they're doing and how they do it differently than what you do, or is it something that crosses your mind at all?
Well, you would think that there would be a greater level of cooperation than perhaps there is. We all circulate each other with what we're doing. So our monthly supplement in the magazine is sent to Scott and Mikkel so they can see what we're doing. Similarly, they very generously send us copies of what they're doing. So we do have an opportunity to cross-check. But we are all we're all plowing our own furrows, really.
That's what I
We all
think.
have
Yeah.
slightly different
Attitude, different take.
yeah, we do have different takes on
Good.
A, what should be listed, and B, how it should be listed. And so we tend to follow our own guidelines rather than paying too much attention to what everybody else is doing, if you see what I mean.
Right, got it. Makes sense. And I guess one of the questions, of course, is, I mean, there's all my interest obviously is the modern material, but a lot of people are interested in, you know, in the early material. For example, like with Rhodesia, a lot of the stuff was recatalogued or reorganized, I guess is a better word, better phrasing of it. And when you do that, you know, all of a sudden you look at the double heads and, oh, at one time it was, you know, a half penny to, you know, the pounder, you know, maybe a couple of dozen, you know, a couple of dozen stamps. But now it's gotten to be this huge, huge thing. And it's good for the advanced collector. But if I'm a novice, I don't know if I would get intimidated, because I don't think I'll get that far. I think I'll probably just drop my tongs and run through the window. You know, so I imagine you try to create different types of catalogs for different levels of collector. Does that sound right?
Well, yes, that would be desirable. We do have our simplified catalogue. Oh dear. Perhaps I was a bit too optimistic about this. But it is a problem that came home to me not very long ago. I'm I suppose you'd call semi-specialized stamp collector. You can't be a specialized collector if you collect everything from Abu Dhabi to Zululand from 1840 to 1980. But I do like to go into a bit more detail with my collecting. And so you you have a wish for your catalogue to give you the information that you want. So you think, well, I don't just want the basic set of stamps. I want the shades, and I want the perforations, and I want the plate floors and the re-entries and all that sort of thing to be included in the catalogue. And you think, well, this is desirable because that must be what everybody wants. I went into a stamp shop in Paris a few years ago, and somebody with a fellow English collector, and he said, this is Hugh Jefferies. He's the editor of the great Stanley Gibbons catalogue. Look, you've got one up there. And the dealer said, yes, it's a load of rubbish. There's too much in there. I can't understand a word of it. And I speak perfect English, by the way. So it came home to me that there was I thinking more detail is what's required. Actually, that's not what everybody requires. They need it to be accessible to the relatively inexperienced collector. So you've got to balance the need to provide collectors with the information that they want against, you know, the dread of making it far too complicated.
Yeah, there's, for me, the standard bearer of that was what Erling Van Dam did with the Canadian Revenue Catalog. You know, before that, there were all these Canadian revenues, these different lists, and suddenly he came up with this catalog and he gave everything a number. And all of a sudden it had a sequence. It was illogical. You could understand it. And they're much more, their lists are much more detailed than that. But this made it so that you could walk around with a little book, you could find the stamps that you wanted, as opposed to, you know, walking around with six tomes that, you know, you have to be fishing around, which you get to eventually, but you can't start with that. Anyhow, so okay. So I guess that's that question. I want to ask you, what is it you'd like to talk about? I mean, what would you like to convey? You have an audience here of what you think the direction of Gibbons is going, or what I don't know. What
Okay. Well, I mean, one point that I could make, and this goes back, I suppose, to our the ivory tower concept that you mentioned at the beginning, that the catalog editor knows what he's doing, and that every collector out there must follow his every word. Well, of course, it's not true, because I don't really have much of a clue about what I'm doing. But the key thing is that nobody knows everything, but every collector knows something that they could help other collectors by spreading the information around. I had a story. I wrote a short piece in the magazine, must have been about 25 years ago, about varieties on the camel postman stamps of Sudan. And I went to Stampex, and a dealer rushed up to me and he said, "Oh, I'm really interested in what you wrote there. I've been studying those for ages." I said, "Well, could you write me an article? I could write you several articles." So I said, "Well, this is wonderful. I look forward to..." Oh dear, I am sorry. I look forward to seeing the first one. Nothing happened. And then I went to the next Stampex and went to his stand, and he wasn't there. And I said, "What happened to Joe?" He said, "Oh, he died on the way home from Stampex last year." So all that information that he had, all lost. And I think it's important to all of us that we don't try and hide what we know. We try and spread it around so that every other collector can have the advantage of it. Now, in this day and age, with the internet and chat rooms, blogs, all that sort of thing, spreading information should be straightforward. But the fact is that even with all this technology, most collectors still oh dear, seem to get most of their information from the catalogue. So I would put out the request for collectors to keep in touch with catalogue editors, whichever catalogue whichever catalogue they use. Keep contact with the editor of that catalogue. Tell him your thoughts. Tell him of your discoveries. Tell him where you think you're making mistakes. Because only by doing that can we get the catalogues to be the perfect reference works that we all want them to be?
All right, well, that's quite a speech. Get yourself.
I'm sorry. Now I'm going to need a rest.
Yeah, give yourself some water. You know, okay, that's very interesting. I think that there are times that the collectors will hold on to information, because when they can walk around, if they disseminate it, then everybody else knows what they're looking for. And I think there's some competition in that. I mean, sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's detrimental. But yeah, definitely, it behooves everybody to have more information out there. And I think now, with the internet and the availability of material, you know, if I have a stamp I haven't seen before, I can just type a couple of things in and it pops up. I see if it's on eBay, or I see if it's in the internet and firmament out there, and then so the access to information, right or wrong, that's not always accurate, is makes things much more available, and in some ways makes the study, you don't need such a large library. I mean, it's good to have a large library, but it isn't always as required to be able to document things. But you know, trying to keep the catalogs abreast, I think at one time, you know, when I guess I was first starting out, I thought the idea of sending a note to the catalog editors, you know, excuse me, Mr. Catalog Editor, this is a very important, you know, the idea of, do you have this listed? And you just feel like, oh my God, you know, no one's going to listen to me. But the catalogs need to hear this stuff, and I do encourage the listeners today that if they haven't submitted something to a catalog and they think they should, then they don't hesitate. And or maybe it's something catalogable. Maybe it's postal history, but then it should be written about in a journal somewhere. So anyway, I'm sorry, you're about to say something. Well, you're trying to say something.
I think the fact is, you probably can't tell by looking at this particular one, but catalog editors are only human, and you know, they are approachable. They're not the sort of ogres that some might have believed in the past. They like to hear from collectors, and I understand the the temptation that if you've got a piece of information, you know about an item that is very scarce, why would you want to tell anybody about it? Because you're going to find one, and once you've found one, then fine, you'll tell the rest of the world about it. But no, I think you will feel better if you spread the information.
Because
somebody else finds it.
Yeah, so then other people find out more about it.
That's good for them.
Yeah, because then I have more eyes watching for the same thing, you know, and then all of a sudden there won't be one thing out there, there may be 10 of them, or maybe there's more. No way of knowing. Okay, well, thank you. Let's see where do you see Stanley Gibbons going? You know, I see Scott trying to be a little more. I think they're offering catalogs electronically by country now. And so that may mean that they're going to potentially, I don't know for certain, but does that mean may be able to update their listings more frequently than once a year? Hard to say. If it's done electronically, it may be possible. Stanley given thought about how the interface between technology and the traditional role of catalog editing is going?
We certainly have, and I would like to say that we haven't already blown a whole lot of money on that very subject. I mean, we realized that the printed catalogues aren't ideal for everybody. And also that with collecting becoming more and more specialized, people don't want a whole 1,000-page book every year anymore. They probably only want to buy 20 pages, but it's not really practical for us to print those 20 pages separately. The obvious answer is to produce the electronic version. And we have, on at least 3 occasions that I can think of, got very close to being able to offer any section of our catalogue in a digital format that you can download for a small amount. But there has always been some niggling little thing which has actually prevented that coming to fruition. Now, I am, as you will realize, very, very far from being technologically proficient. I would have no idea if you asked me what had not worked. All I know is that so far we haven't managed to make it work, but we are working. We have people who are much more qualified than I am working on that, probably not as we speak, but
it is 11.
you know, it's going on all the time. The idea will be that you can have whatever section of the catalogue that you want, when you want it, regularly updated, and you can have, have an annual subscription. Just don't ask me when it will become available, I'm afraid, because I just don't know.
That's okay.
But yes, we have to work on that process, because there is a our 6-volume Stamps the World catalogue is now a £300 book. It can't go on. It can't go on forever. Every year, more and more thousands of stamps are being issued, all of which need to be listed, and the catalogue gets bigger, and the print gets less and less feasible.
Readable.
So yeah, we know what we need to do. It's just a matter of cracking those those final little niggly gremlins that are causing us all the problem.
Okay, I want to change to another subject. In my experience with gibbons, I've noticed over the years, at one time I opened up the new gibbons and suddenly there were perfins in the back of Australia. And then I think I woke up a couple years later and suddenly opened up the catalog again, and there are booklets.
Yeah.
So you've done a deep dive into all these other aspects. Is there anything upcoming of that ilk that you could be expected to list, or you're just trying to keep up with what's coming out, or is there nothing else to think about?
The the mover behind this, I think, is it's partly going back to the business of we want our catalogue to be what people want it to be. So if there are people who are collecting official perfins of Australia or New Guinea or Sudan, and we can produce a listing of those that we can add to the catalogue, then why not? There are various areas where the job is not yet finished. So 100 years ago, the Commonwealth Catalogue included full listings of Great Britain stamps used in post offices overseas. Gradually, we have expanded that to include other areas. So I guess it was about 5 years ago, we added listings of Indian stamps used in Aden. Sometime before that, we'd done Indian stamps used in Zanzibar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and 1 or 2 other places. There are various other used abroad options which could provide listing opportunities in the future. So just to pull something out of the sky, for 30 years or so, Cape of Good Hope stamps were used in Basuto land. Now, we don't have a listing of Cape of Good Hope stamps used in Basuto land, but it would be within the parameters of the catalogue to do that. So, and you know, there are many others. We do list the perforated officials of Australia and New Guinea, but we don't currently list those for the Australian colonies, South Australia, Western Australia. That's another possibility that that you know comes to mind. Now, with all these things, ideally, we would love somebody who collects the subject to offer to help us to create the listing, rather in the same way as the Rhodesia Study Circle offered to help us update the Rhodesian admirals for part 1 2 or 3 years ago. And, you know, may we hope one day do the same sort of thing with the double heads that you mentioned earlier. It's all a matter of, you know, we need to bring in the expertise. And this is something that the catalogue has always done. I look back in the files and I see letters from the 1930s from very well-known collectors of that era, putting forward suggestions for how a more detailed listing of Western Australia could be created. Right. And then the collecting fraternity or the specialist society combines with the editorial team at Stanley Gibbons, and we finish up with what we hope is the definitive listing of that subject.
Right, and yeah, it's interesting to me that, you know, the catalog didn't start out by being, you know, 300 pounds.
Yeah,
it started out as being a thin volume, and over time, you know, more and more information is added to it, and it's not as if these numbers existed, you know, when the world was created. You know, these are numbers that man's assigned to, and it's trying to create order from chaos. And it's our attempt to create a garden in the universe. And I know, you know, to some, I think it's a little unsettling that the numbers are not sacrosanct. But to me, it's a living, breathing thing that needs to be tweaked every once in a while, and needs to be, you know, new discoveries have to be added in and included, and so on and so forth. So I'm sorry, I think they interrupt you. I think I did.
No. Sorry, I do beg your pardon. I think the other thing is that if there is a catalogue that's coming out every year, you want there to be something new in there, something that makes the person who bought the 2022 edition say, I must have the 2023 as well. Now, I used to buy, before I joined Stanley Gibbons, I used to buy the Part 1 catalogue the day it came out, and I honestly didn't care what was in it. I would go down to my local stamp shop and I'd hand over my money, and I'd like to think that I would still do it today, and I wouldn't say, huh, it's 70, it's 90 pounds or whatever. I would say, this is my treat to myself of the year. I think even though I work on the catalogue for whatever it is, 9 months over the year, when I finally get, you know, the printed copy in my sticky little fingers, that is one of the high points of my year. Now, I appreciate that makes me sound like a really sad old git, but, you know, facts are facts. That's that's how I feel. But there are people who say, well, yeah, you've changed a few prices, but I think I can still make do with last year's. Well, you know, I don't want people to ever think that. I want them to say, oh gosh, look, there's a new feature of I don't know, Indian stamps used in Dubai in this year's edition. I must have it because of that. So you must, you know, my desire is to try and make that catalogue something that people want to buy. And that's why new stuff goes in all the time as well.
Makes sense. Is there anything new that you're working on that you can tell us about, or is that tipping your hand?
Well, hardly. The 2023 edition is at the printers at the moment. should be delivered in the next few days. So yes, there are a few things that are new. The only actual listing is the one I've just mentioned about Indian stamps used in Dubai. But every year there are loads of new discoveries, and you know, additional notes that go in all the time. Apart, of course, from the whatever's happening on prices, which, you know, may or may not be what excites you.
Yeah, that's a question about how you get to prices. But there was another question I was going to ask. Oh, I forgot now. Hopefully it come back to me. How do you, the prices in the catalog are prices that, if you have the material in stock, is what you would be selling it at. That's how you, it's a retail price list, and in essence, if you have it.
That's right. I mean, that has always been our, well, when the catalogue first came out, it was purely the company's retail price list. Now it is the company's retail price list should the item in question be in stock. But it's still the only catalogue which is, or the only major world catalogue which is still a company's retail price list.
Got it.
And therefore, you know, clearly the prices need to be set with some care and discretion, shall we say.
Got it. One question I have, this now I remember what I was going to say. The amount of changes, and I'm going to pick an arbitrary year, but say 1980, because I'm trying to avoid the new issues. As the number of changes or clarifications / improvements in the pre-1980 catalog, you can change the year if you want. Has that changed in the last 20 years, the last 30? Has been any noticeable?
I'd say it changed. I'd say it hasn't just changed in the last 20 years. It changes every year.
Well, okay.
I think the one of the things that I do like with people, email has made contacting the catalog editor so much easier. And I get emails from collectors all the time, and some of my non-stamp collecting colleagues think, oh God, what a stupid question. And I think if somebody needs to ask that question, then maybe the catalogue isn't as clear as we think it is. So, look at that that listing and those footnotes that have been there for 80 years. And if somebody thinks, can't follow them, maybe they can be improved upon. Maybe an additional illustration would help. Maybe, all sorts of things. The key thing is to try and make the catalogue better all the time. And silly questions are just as good as sensible ones in the trying to achieve that.
There's no stupid question.
Oh, I love stupid questions.
No, I said there is no stupid question.
Steve, that is a good segue. Do you want us? We have a bunch of questions from
I
the
know.
audience.
I'm looking at the
Okay.
So I think we should get everyone in to this conversation. What do you think?
I'm game. Are you right with that, Hugh? You're ready to go?
Yeah. If they'll have me, I will apologize again, but there will be a fair bit of coughing here and there, but I'll do my best.
Okay. So I'm going to add Rob to help field some of the questions that are in the Q&A. And again, thank everyone for coming. And I'm going to start moving you over so you could ask your questions. If you'd like priority, please put your hand up. And remember, when you come over here, you do have to accept the invitation to come over. And then you have to turn on your microphone and your camera so we can see you.
And everybody should remember that this will be taped. It'll be available on the British Empire Study Group website and also on perhaps other websites. We'll see. It's just for anybody to know that.
Okay, well, we can start off with a question here from Peter Coburn. He wants to know what determines changes in prices and how does SG study actual prices in order to bring them up to date? What is the methodology?
Well, there are a wide range of there's a wide range of information that we look at. So each year, every section of the catalogue will have its prices checked. Obviously, we are aware of all the major international auctions going on. So any big prices achieved at auction will be taken into account. We also try to follow perhaps not quite such well-known auction houses, and we need to keep an eye on dealer price lists, predominantly our own stock. So I mean, we are all stamp collectors at Stanley Gibbons, or at least in the specialist departments. We know what's good. We know what we can't find for our own collections. We know what we can't buy to put into stock. And we know the things that are relatively easy to replace once they've been sold. So it's those sort of factors that are taken into account. Now, we could always do more. If we were able to follow every internet auction realization, then perhaps accuracy could be improved even further. If we read all the society journals, listened to all the blogs and the chat rooms, there are snippets of information there which will tell you, what's good and what's even better. But the end result is that we need to put prices to stamps for our retail price list for the things that we hope that we have in stock. And it is a it requires a lot of experience, but I think the end result is that the book is trusted almost all over the world to be as accurate as anything is. So I don't really know what more one can say, except that if anybody ever feels that we've got something wrong, if we're pricing something too high or pricing something too low, they have only to tell us. We love to listen to people's thoughts about the catalogue, and any help that anybody is prepared to offer would be more than welcome.
Fair enough. Daryl Templer's got an interesting question. In 1981, Gibbons issued a catalog titled The Catalog of Commonwealth Varieties.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but will there be another one of these with more recent information?
Okay. Well, that was an extract from the old Elizabethan catalogue, and I've got a copy just down here somewhere. If I could pull it out from the file, I still use it very regularly. The Elizabethan catalogue ran very successfully through the 1960s and 70s, but sales were beginning to drop off, and it was felt that the varieties may be holding it back. So they pulled the varieties out of the Elizabethan and put them into a separate volume. That volume only appeared once. My guess is that it didn't sell as well as they'd hoped it would. And so they were put back into the Elizabethan for yet another year. Actually, it was 1983. And that also didn't sell as well as hoped. So they then took the varieties out again for the 1984 version. And the 1984 version was the last edition of the Elizabethan that there was. So it's a matter of trying to juggle what the collector wants. And we've made mistakes. We've tried things, and sometimes collectors love what we try, and sometimes they don't. And sadly, that catalogue of varieties was one of the things that they didn't take up in very big numbers. So we assume that, they weren't that keen on it, and certainly it wasn't economically viable for us to continue producing it.
Okay.
Hope that's covered that one.
I think so. This is an anonymous question. Can you say something about the color descriptions that are given in your catalogs relative to the SG color key?
Okay. The catalogue has been in production since 1865 for the first 100 or so years, or perhaps the first 50 years. The catalogue describer would look at a stamp and say, that's deep violet, without much to refer to other than what was in his own brain. Then we produced color keys from the early part of the 20th century. And up until 1970, we had a 100 color key. And all new issues were checked against that, and their color was assigned. In 1972, I think, we produced our first 200 color key. And from that date, all the colors have been, all the new issue colors have been described against that. Now, it's never been our intention to go back and review the pre-1972 colors against the 200 color key, 200 color key. So, but if something's being rewritten, as for example the Rhodesian admirals were, those were checked against the color key, and so those colors are accurate. I have to say that I use the color key a great deal. I use mine a great deal. It's looking a bit tatty now, but I bought it pretty much the month it first came out, and I still use it pretty much all the time. And I still find it is very helpful. But you have to accept that for a stamp that was described for the catalogue in 1890 as being slate blue, for example, was not referenced against the color key, and to hope that it might be exactly the same as the swatch on the color key is, I'm afraid, hoping for a little bit too much.
Also, the range of stamps that they had to evaluate a set with were probably more limited than there are now. Presumably, there's more material out there as time goes on. Well, there's argument about that, I guess, could be made the other way. But so I would think that if someone has done a really exhaustive research on, say, Bermuda key plates or something like that, or Rhodesian heads, you could have line up a couple of dozen different shade variations and go to town, which if you in the 1890s, they probably had, well, they didn't have the heads at that point, obviously, but you have less resource, less material to look at.
And don't even mention the Australia George V penny.
Oh no, that's a whole world unto itself.
This is interesting, the color descriptions as early GB, such as pale milky blue, deep full blue. When do they date from?
Well, if you're talking about the shades given in the specialized catalog, that's another story again, because the color key is not really designed to help sort shades in the specialized catalog listings. It just would not be feasible. I mean, if you think about it, an Edward VII halfpenny blue green looks completely different to a George V Downy head halfpenny blue green. They're just completely different colors, but the catalogue still describes them both as blue green. You can't expect the color key to be of much help. Where the specialized listings are concerned, shades are comparative. So if you've got your standard green and there's a specialized yellow green, it will probably be just a little bit more yellow than the green. Whereas on a general stamp, a yellow green will probably be quite a significantly different color. I'm sorry, I'm
Right.
probably not explaining myself very clearly.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I think you know what you mean.
If you look at the Edward Halfpenny's, you've got similar color descriptions between the De La Rue and Harrison.
But the colors are different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Yes, if we could produce a 1,000 color key for the specialist GB collector, that would be wonderful.
or provide
But
color illustrations of actual specimens.
well, the thing about the color key is that the colors are fast. You can't really work from color illustrations that are going to be lithographically reproduced in quantity.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. But anyway, yeah, if we could produce a specialist color key, would anybody be prepared to spend the, I don't know, 700 or 800 quid on it that that it would require? Such things are very, very expensive to produce.
And you couldn't even do it by computer, because if I showed you a plum red stamp and I try to do a scan of that plum red stamp, it won't be the same thing.
No.
Right.
It's everything is changeling.
Yeah.
So either that or a chameleon. Take your choice.
Yeah, that's a problem.
I found it interesting looking at early GB stamps in auction catalogues, and you can see the distinct shades, in the catalogues sent out by various auction houses, and you could almost use those as reference.
Got to be careful, because if from each issue of a catalog could be different. Why do they change printer?
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know that. I mean, you might be right sometimes, but you might not be right.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be certain about it. Anyway, more questions?
Hugh, would there, it's Garfield Porch here from Toronto. Would there ever be a chance that the Stanley Gibbons would convert the descriptions to the Pantone matching system, which is an internationally recognized color numbering system? One of the things that I've been considering, I'm a member of I'm the president of the Vincent Graves Green Philatelic Research Foundation, and I'm privileged to have access to a VSC 6000 to play with on the stamps. And I took 7 Stanley Gibbons color gauges and did spectrographic analysis of the colors, and I got 7 different results for the same description. This is a function of the age of the gauge, and also a function of the printer, whoever did it. So there's going to be some kind of a minor variance, but the Pantone matching system is standard throughout the world now, through the entire graphic arts industry. And would it not seem to make sense to put in as a parenthetical description at the Pantone equivalent for single color stamps?
Yes, it's not very prosaic, I suppose. I do see what you mean, and I can see that there would be some benefits in that, although how collectors would feel about not calling their Tuppenny Halfpenny Silver Jubilee Prussian Blue anymore, but calling it a Tuppenny Halfpenny Silver Jubilee 372B. But I admit you could combine the two.
An extension to this thing.
I don't think anybody should have their minds closed against that sort of possibility.
Yeah, one of
but
the
it's
other
not been
arguments.
considered in the past.
Yeah, one of the other parts of that discussion is that my collection happens to be the Canada Small Queens of 1870. And
Yes.
if you look at the 3-cent value, they printed 1.4 billion of the stamps. And I don't think I've yet to find two the same color. And, I've only looked at 500,000 of them. So there's absolutely no consistency, and the color guide becomes absolutely useless in that respect. So I think that there are certain issues that you can just never collect by color, period.
Yeah.
Would that be an issue of the ink being fugitive or being oxidizing over time? So
That was
you
my
can have two
question.
sheets.
No, well, the answer is that the issue is printed over a period of 27 years.
Oh, they printed lots of times and everything.
Using
every time was different.
33 plates, and God only knows how many printings. I'm sure they went back to the press, probably over 100 times. And with the
Okay.
inexact method of mixing inks, if you get two the same, that's a coincidence. Three, you got a new collection.
Also, you can have two stamps off the same sheet, be start out the same color, spend a certain, and each spend a different amount of time in different kind of sunlight, and now they don't match no more.
Yeah, the oxidation.
Well, one of the other huge things is that in 1870, they heated the printing plant using coal burning stoves. So the first thing you've got is sulfur in the air that's going to affect the ink. But it didn't also help that they were downwind from a paper mill either. And that just puts all kinds of garbage into the air. So before you even get to the post office, you've got color varieties.
It sounds like there's as many color varieties as there are types of curry in India.
Not
Well,
smoke.
it sounds like
queens
somebody's
have got more.
worthwhile collecting.
Yeah, but surely you can group the shades.
Now you could do.
Bob, any more questions you see there?
Yeah.
There's also people that,
Aaron Karp wants to know, what is a typical print run for a Gibbons catalog? And how has that number changed during your time at Stanley Gibbons?
Right. There you've got me, because I am no longer party to what the print runs are since I retired, happily. But I can tell you that that print runs have been continuously declining. Pretty much throughout my time at Stanley Gibbons, although I'm not accepting total responsibility for that myself. I would say that Part 1 catalogue is probably about a quarter of the print run that it would have been 25 years ago. So, and on top of that, had not print itself become much more economic, some of these catalogues just would not be viable now.
But also it's done differently, because you don't necessarily need to buy a full Part 1. If I'm only collecting Australia or the Caribbean Islands, I would buy the little red book, the little yellow book, for that particular area. So I wouldn't. So in some ways, it's not exactly, you're not comparing apples with apples.
No, that is true. So rather than one big catalogue, we're producing lots of smaller catalogues. The sales of that one big catalogue have declined, but obviously the sales of the smaller catalogues have compensated us to a considerable degree for those declines.
All right.
Yeah, fair.
Considering the age of collectors nowadays, and the majority of them, I'd say, would not be touching with barge poles anything which is modern. Do we really need to have any listings of new issues? Like, I mean, could the new issues not be listed? For example, you're talking about the Central Africa catalogue. Could the new issues be listed every 10 years in the Central Africa catalogue for Central Africa? I mean, let's not keep encouraging these postal administrations. And I'm not talking about little countries. I'm talking about England and Australia. You know, the amount of stuff that we're putting out is just a joke. You know, could they not be relegated to the back and to the appendix?
I have a lot of sympathy with what you're saying. But there have been one or two occasions where we had features in the magazine. There's a feature in Gibbon Stamp Monthly called Stamp News in Brief. And it's not a catalogue supplement of new issues. It is basically just the PR of the postal administrations telling us what they're producing. So it will say, for example, you know, Great Britain, set of 10 stamps for the Rolling Stones, followed by another set of 10 stamps for birds, followed by another set of 10 stamps showing Superman and Batman. So it's not got any philatelic information or, to my mind, value in there whatsoever.
Yes.
And I have I had a number of occasions thought, this is a waste of space. You know, we could put a decent article on those 2 pages.
But
So,
you're only 10. You're only listing the simplified set. You're not giving us the full listing, are you?
yeah, but people complain if you don't give them the new issue information that they want, and you would be surprised. You would really be surprised. I mean, we sit here and think, oh yes, I'd love to go back to sorting out my George V heads or my line engraved GB, but there are people who are desperately interested in those new issues. And I'm sorry, but you know, it is Stanley Gibbons' almost bounden duty to the collector to try and provide those collectors with the information that they want. So we still do it, and they still seem to lap it up. You know, I can't understand it either, but you know, facts are facts. We can't argue with them.
In defense of the country's post offices, the commemoratives, what they call commemoratives, you might not think are commemoratives, but often they do commemorate something that is worth looking into. Right now, I was thinking about Ukraine. It would be interesting to see what's going to be coming out of Ukraine, all surrounding the war. It might be as interesting as the famine series that's coming out of Russia from 1922-23. And one of the things from the, I think it was Ukraine, was firefighting equipment. It was a T-54 converted into firefighting equipment. It's like, I had no idea they could do that. Apparently, it was just changing the.
That's really interesting, Edward. We have a bunch of people asking questions.
Hands up.
So
yeah.
could we go to Edward? That's really interesting. I know there's a lot of people here, and I really want to make sure you gets a good night's sleep, because I feel god awful if he has a relapse. So Len, you have a question, and I know Dilip, you're on, and you had a question also, but let's go with Len first, please.
Hello, Hugh.
Hello, Len. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. One point you made earlier is important is telling the catalogue editor and other people that things exist. One thing I've found over the years is that if you tell people that you found something, they will almost certainly come back and tell you what you've not found, and therefore it's beneficial to you because you can then go and fill the gaps yourself. I have every sympathy with you on the colour issue, having bashed my head against a brick wall trying to rationalise the colours on the Malaya 1948 definitives. There is a logic to it, but it's well beyond the scope of the catalogue.
Yes.
And just to give you some lofty, hopefully the new Malaysia second edition will be out in the near future.
Well, I've never fear, Len. I have your email. I will be in touch. Hopefully you'll be able to help on the next one too.
Right, thanks.
So if you don't mind, maybe I can pipe in a little bit with a question. It's a little bit different than the rest have been so far. First off, thank you for organizing the session, and again for Hugh and Stephen to participate and give us this talk. I'm curious about catalog listings, and my question really comes based on the Scott catalog, but I suspect that the Gibbons catalog would have some similar issues, where, for instance, again, for Central African countries, there is a number of more recent listings, perhaps 1980 to over 2000, that simply have a line put in instead of value. Often it's for use stamps, sometimes it's for also mint stamps. There's a picture given, but there's no valuation whatsoever. And I've been trying to understand, well, what does that really mean? Is it that the stamp's not known, or is it that there's no way to establish a price? I have in the past sent pictures of stamps that Scott's has asked for to illustrate that the stamp exists used, and yet nothing changes. So, you know, there's no pricing given in future editions. How do we deal with that? How does the Gibbons catalog deal with that? Or what do they mean?
Okay, well, there are a number of areas where we don't provide a price. Generally speaking, we only or prefer to price only things which we know to exist, and also that we know to exist genuinely. So if we have seen a stamp with an inverted watermark mint, then we will attempt to put a price on that stamp. If we see that same stamp with a forged postmark, we're not going to price it used, because until we've actually seen one with a genuine postmark on it. There are a number of items which have no price on, but if you were to send me a scan of a stamp which is currently unpriced, then we would seek to try and provide a price for you. I can't say too much about 1990s Central African Republic, because unfortunately I don't edit that catalogue, and I don't collect Central African Republic, and so I don't really know what the truth behind those are. I suspect quite a lot of them, you know, we assume were only sold via the agencies and never sent to the country concerned. But occasionally these things do turn up. Now, in a Commonwealth country, I would try to do my best to put a price on everything that I can. But yeah, Central African Republic could be a problem.
Well, it wasn't specifically Central Africa Republic. It's Congo, for instance. It's Ghana and so on. And, you know, these stamps are legitimately used because they came from mail to a large Canadian university in the admissions department. So I know that they're legitimate use, and typically they're definitives, not commemoratives. But still, there's no listings given for price. So anyway, it's
Okay,
something
well,
to take
I
out.
would, anything that relates to a Commonwealth country, and you mentioned Ghana there, I would be very interested to receive details of what you have. And when we next do our West Africa catalogue, we'll try to include them all and price accordingly.
Okay,
Can't promise, obviously, but
sure.
I think
we will certainly do our best.
Thank you.
my perspective, I think it's important just to list the fact that the stamps exist like that. Because you have to separate the wallpaper from the real McCoy.
Yeah.
So
I would like to follow up on this because I specialize in collecting India and Indian states. And I have a number of stamps in my collection that have RPSL or BPA certificates, and yet they're not listed in the Gibbons catalog. Also, some of these stamps are so rare that only supposedly Stanley Gibbons says only 2 or 3 of them exist. And I've not seen one I'm looking for that I've not seen in the last 20 years in any auction or any other place. So how do you price that? Obviously, I'd be happy to send you the ones I have that are either certified or they look genuine that are not listed in the catalog. But more importantly, some of these things that only trade maybe once every 30 years, how would you price those in the catalog?
Well, obviously, Indian states is a story all of its own. But every year we do add a number of new varieties, and I have a number of correspondents who offer suggestions, and I would welcome more. If there's something which you feel we should be listing, then please let us know. And if our in-house team feels that they disagree, then we will let you know why we disagree. But obviously, as I've said before, our objective is to try and produce the best possible listing that collectors want, and with the assistance of those collectors, we will try and do that. Let me know what you have. We don't want to see the stamps, obviously, but scans of certificates and the stamps themselves and details of why you think they should be in the catalogue. As somebody said, my door is always open.
with that remark, I want everybody to know I put Hugh's email and my email on the chat, so you can copy it down if you want it. I think it's as a result of this presentation, we'll have it when it goes to text or whatever. When it goes online, we'll have our emails also available, so people can contact us.
I'll make sure we do that. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Dilip, while you're talking, you have the floor. Did you have some other questions? I know you had a couple more.
Well, one of the things that has bothered me is the difference in the valuation between the Scott and the Gibbons catalogs for some of these Commonwealth countries. And there's a huge difference in many cases. And you mentioned earlier that you do exchange information with them, but it seems like the differences have not been reconciled. And I was just wondering, is there any way to figure out which is a more reasonable estimate of the value?
Well, as I said earlier, we catalogue editors tend to plough our own furrows. We do occasionally correspond with each other, but generally speaking, we prefer to correspond with specialist collectors, dealers, and as far as Stanley Gibbons is concerned, with our own expert staff in London to make decisions. We obviously keep an eye on what Scott's listing, as no doubt they would keep an eye on what we're listing. But you know, we're all in business, I suppose, at the end of the day, to sell our own catalogues. So while we cooperate to a degree, we are all trying to make
Catch
our
the market.
catalogue better than the next guys.
Now, I've always thought of Gibbons as being more useful with the U stamps than Scott, because I think they value them more highly.
Okay.
And when I say that, I think that when I say highly, does it mean a more expensive? Yeah, because I think it's also, you know, commercial usage, not first day cover usage, that kind of thing. So, you know,
yeah, I mean, that's important, important to me too.
It's more reflective, I think, of the difficulty of finding some of these stamps. So, yeah. Other questions? I think there were, more, the proverbial hand up. Let's see. I see I see a Richard Moss.
Richard.
Yes, speak.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, Hugh.
Hello, Richard.
Now, I'd like to ask a question about digital catalogues. And I've just looked on the Gibbons website, and I find that the current concise catalogue is going to be on sale for £40, but the digital one is on sale for 28. Now, if I were to buy the a lot of us buy catalogues for reference purposes, which last us 4 or 5 years, and we do buy several catalogues.
Yeah.
But if I bought the digital catalogue at £28 and you produced a new one next year, which I believe you will do, what happens to my £28 subscription after 1 year?
Oh gosh.
Does it continue?
Do you know, I have absolutely no idea. I'm sorry.
Well, what I have also looked at, I've also looked at Scott's just now as well, and some of the Scott catalogues, you have an annual subscription, which in a lot of cases is about a third of the cost of the appears to be about a third of the cost of the printed catalogue, and that was Germany. And if you take the case of Portugal, it's about 20%. Now, on the basis of an annual subscription. Now, my own view is that if somebody buys a catalogue for a digital catalogue for £28, and they're not a specialist, they just want to have a reference, they're much better off buying the printed once every 5 or 10 years, rather than buying the digital, because they're going to be paying out £28 every year, possibly.
I suspect you're right. I think that it sounds like an annual subscription price to me.
It doesn't say that, but I think it probably is.
Once your year's up, that may be it.
Yes.
Well, Richard, we could forward your question to the market, your sales department, and they'll probably be better.
I shall be interested to find out the answer to that.
Okay, then I'll write it down to you, and you can bring it to him.
Okay, let's go on to Frank Wheeler. I'm sorry, Richard, I'm not trying to cut you off, but I'm just trying to get as many questions out there. Frank, go. We lost Frank. Well, maybe I'll give the floor back to Richard. Let's see, there must be other people who have questions here someplace.
It's Yvonne Kolaric in Oklahoma. And it's really wonderful to see your face and to meet you. And what I found, even though I've been collecting stamps for over 50 years, is that finding and being able to afford the Stanley Gibbons Commonwealth and British Empire has really opened up a world to me, because you have so much more detailed information of the Commonwealth and the British Empire than the Scott catalog does. And just having all those extra things, like in Hong Kong, where you're talking about stamps of Hong Kong used in the other Chinese British post offices and things, that's so valuable to me that before I had no idea those were even, I could see the different postmarks. I didn't know what they meant. They just went on a page. over here that I would ask a question about it to someone at some point, but now your catalog opens all that up to me, and I really appreciate that.
Well, it's very good to hear. I'm glad you're
good
enjoying
student.
it and getting value
So
from
frustrating. I've
it.
got
Gives
no
me
idea.
lots of pleasure too.
But the other thing is that to have a book, a paper, is that you can study it at night on your pillow. You can study it anywhere. They are like Bibles in the stamp world to understand, because I'm not an expert in every area. I like to look at all the different areas and how other countries are, how their postal systems work,
Very good.
and all these things. And that when you have it in hand, you know, things can change, or your internet can go out. I mean, I live on the edge of digital connection here in Ponca City, but so it's really helpful to just have it in paper. And I think that the prices on the stamps, what makes a difference is that our currencies change one country to the next, one year to the next. Sometimes the dollar's stronger, sometimes the pound is stronger. And so it's kind of a relative price. It gives you an idea, but it's not what it is to another person who wants your stamp.
That's good.
That's great.
That's good.
Thank you.
Who's that?
David Benson.
Oh, okay, speak.
Why is the catalogue value of Great Britain stamps, particularly Queen Victoria issues, used in GB much higher than those used in the various use abroad countries?
Yeah, it's a very good question. But the reason is that the prices in GB are for very fine used examples, which generally speaking, especially for surface printed, means circular date stamp, clean circular date stamps. And so that's the prices in the GB section. GB used abroad, most of the obliterations will be the duplex numeral types.
Yes,
so they would not count as fine used for Great Britain.
Yes, but the GB...
so it's not really like for like. So I had hoped that we were sort of clear about this in the catalogue. We have little notes here and there, but you know, maybe it's not as clear as it should be. Perhaps I should have another look at that.
Yeah,
but that's the answer anyway.
But the problem with that answer is the problem with that answer is that the duplex canceller have the numeral and the CDS. And in I'd say most cases, in a lot of cases, the use abroad will only show the CDS part of it, which would be equivalent to what the GB fine use would be.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look there's an article at the beginning of part 1 about what's it called? It's about stamp condition anyway. And it points out that if you have a used abroad postmark with a fine CDS rather than the numeral, then the value will be more like the GB value than the used abroad value, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I understand that, but the collectors of the used abroad are much less than those collectors of GB, and they will pay much higher percentage of catalogue for the used abroad than they would pay for the GB.
Yes. Well, there are, I think it's fair to say this has been an area that's been slightly neglected over recent years, but we are aware that there is big increase in interest in GB used abroad at the moment, and there are, dare I say, quite a few price increases coming in the next part one.
Okay, thank you very much for your help.
Okay.
Okay, I see a question here from Tony Shields. He wants to know when's Gibbons going to list the South Australian departmental stamps. I guess.
Okay, well, I have been working on this for about 3 years myself. What I would dearly love is for somebody who actually collects the South Australia departmental stamps to offer to help with the work.
I can find those folks. If they're not on the call tonight.
Because it's something that we would like to do. And obviously there's a great deal of interest in the subject. There've been some big sales. But basically I would probably need to sit down in a darkened room for the best part of a year to produce that listing if I don't get any help. And there wouldn't be any other work done at all. So it's a gradual process. I am working on it. When the job will be completed, I don't know. But yeah, I'd love a volunteer or two. That would be great.
I can help with that. I can help with some of that. I mean, I can help get the people. I don't have the material, unfortunately. But I
love the way you list all the people in Gibbons that contribute. I think that's really special. But
well, it's important that people get recognized, and unfortunately not everybody does, because somebody just sends me an inverted watermark or something that they've discovered. You know, I'd be filling the book with names if everybody was mentioned. But you know, my gratitude is as great to the person who supplies one new variety as the person who rewrites South Australia.
Frank Wheeler, are you back yet?
Oh, well, I see Anthony Hughes has got his hand up. Frank's
okay,
not.
let's go.
Anthony, speak.
Just curiosity, when you say GB used abroad, do you mean Ireland as well, or is Ireland regarded as part of the GB?
I didn't mean Ireland, no. At the moment, we treat GB used in Ireland. Oh no, I was told not to say anything controversial, but I'm afraid we treat them the same as we treat GB used in Scotland and Wales.
Just
at the moment, and I appreciate that Irish collectors are, you know, very keen on GB used in Ireland, but it's just outside the scope of our catalogue at the moment.
Okay, so edit that out of the recording.
No, I collect a county in Westmeath in Ireland called Westmeath, and I'm very anxious to be used in Ireland. So I was just curious, that's all. Nothing controversial about it.
It would be, I'd be interested in seeing a catalogue of British stamps with Irish postmarks. I think that would be quite interesting. But whether it could be published by Stanley Gibbons, I don't know.
Okay, onward and upward. Chris Dorn, I think. Oh, you here somewhere?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I see Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Hugh.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, I've got one other question for you. So, you know, and like a broken record, it's going to relate again to Cape triangles. But I wanted to know, why is it that for the you know, the early Perkins Bacon's printing, that for Great Britain, the anything on blued paper is described as, and listed as paper more or less blued. But for Cape triangles, you have slightly blued and deeply blued with separate catalog numbers. That absolutely drives me insane. And I just wondered, it's something that a lot of the exhibitors that do the Cape triangles and stuff also talk about, this inconsistency. So I was just curious about that, and if there's any possibility of making the Cape triangles also paper more or less blued and just be done with it.
Well, somebody once said to me that the only thing that's consistent about a stamp catalogue is the fact that it's not consistent. So I'm afraid that is one of the classic examples of that. I can see the lack of logic, and of course, collecting a slightly wider area, I'm aware that there will be similar issues in, I don't know, Barbados, Trinidad, other countries that were printed by Perkins Bacon at about that time. And that was not the only one. There was an early perforator that was used by Perkins Bacon, and it was used to perforate the stamps of about 10 different colonies. And we used about 4 different descriptions for that same perforator under the different colonies, until somebody pointed it out to me. And about 5 or 6 years ago, it all became consistent. So why not the blued papers? I can certainly have a look at that. It makes good sense to me. I must admit, it had never occurred to me, but this is just one of the benefits of this sort of forum. Such things come to light. Thank you very much.
Well, excellent. Thank you.
Hugh, one of the things, if you're moving to outside line, that can help you out with attributions, you don't have to print all the names of everyone who contributed. It can just be a link that someone can pop on and see all the names. And as the hues of colors, you might even have a small article, a small mention of the names of the people who made the attributions, what years. So it will give you a history, not just of the stamp, but of the Gibbons process.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm afraid that that would be a major thing, wouldn't it? We generally keep up, once an edition's gone to press and has been replaced by a new edition, everything is into the file and then forgotten about. Well, not forgotten about, but until somebody asks a question and says, when was this stamp first issued? And I can go and look through the catalogues and I can find that it was first issued in 1934. And with any luck, I can then look in the appropriate country file and find out on what basis that stamp was first listed. Of course, if it was listed much earlier than that, then the correspondence files don't exist anymore. So, I don't know who might have who we might be able to attribute things to back in the late 19th century or early 20th century. But, there are cases all the time where specialist societies say, why have you got this stamp listed? We've never seen one. And so I can look in the file and say, well, we did see one in 1962 and it had a BPA certificate. And then somebody says, oh, yes, and then 2 years later it pops up in auction again. So you know, the history is there, and it's part of the fascination of the job and the fascination of the hobby, trying to sort of keep track of everything.
Excellent, very good. Paul Davey, I see.
Yeah,
you have a
hi
hand up.
Hugh.
Hi,
Just
Paul.
a question. One of the catalogues that Gibbon has produced, as far as I know, 2 editions of so far, is Collect British Postmarks.
Yeah.
So I have sort of 2 questions really. Do you intend to continue doing that? Do you know?
I think so.
I find
Yes.
it very useful. And were the prices for things sort of worked out the same way as for the stamp catalogues?
No. There was a slight. Well, we purchased the title to Collect British Postmarks. It had originally been created by Dr. Tim Whitney, who wrote and priced his catalogue. He then sold the title to a chap called Bill Pipe, who approached us and said, you know, could we do this together? And Bill's an old friend who lives locally to me, so it seemed to work out pretty well. But Bill did most of the pricing, and so it wasn't done by the catalogue team at the Strand. So yeah, you can't use Collect British Postmarks in the same way as you would use any other Gibbons catalogue to say, I'll be able to buy a copy of this at this price from the Strand, because that's not the way it works. Collect British Postmarks has been much more of a collector put together product, and I know that work is going ahead on the next one with new features, new listings, but again, they will be the work of probably specialist collectors rather than the Stanley Gibbons pricing team.
So will Bill still be looking after that?
I must admit, I've had very little involvement in that, apart from actually getting the thing moving in the first place for the previous edition. One of my other colleagues has been looking after that one.
All right, thanks.
So I can't take any credit.
Speaking of credit, I forgot to thank Emma. Emma's Hugh's daughter, and she did a marvelous job in getting everything hooked up. So
getting it pixelated.
Yes, she's
because I am totally incompetent when it comes to anything to do with these things, Zoomy things. So
and you wanted links, right?
Yeah. So Emma came to spend the night with us so that I could she could make sure I didn't foul up.
Well, I think there are no more questions. I think Hugh, it must be well, it's getting later for all of us, I guess, but for you certainly it's later, and so perhaps we should let you get some rest.
Well, may I say that it's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed meeting everybody, and you know, I hope that we can find an excuse to do it again one day.
And I think so, because from judging from the comments I see in the chat and so on, I think the process of doing a catalog is something I don't think people have actually thought about a whole hell of a lot. And all of a sudden they go, oh, there's this whole range of things that constitute putting this thing together. It isn't just something. It didn't come down from Mount Sinai, you know, in a tablet form. It's something that's organic, and it's created by people. So you know, and I think that's something we can explore further.
Well, the fact is that a lot of it is based on last year's, but there is new stuff coming in all the time. And yeah, I could probably talk for hours on that if my voice would hold out, but just as well for you that I can't.
If I could just make one comment, yeah, if I could retrogress a little bit, you talked about stupid questions. I always grew up with the analogy, or whatever you want to call it. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for a very fine evening again.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I echo that. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Steve, Rob,
Good fun.
thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks very much indeed. And so far, it's worked.
That's terrific. So now, do you do autographed editions of the Stanley Gibbons catalog, like autographed by the editor?
I have done, yes. If anybody wants the value of their catalogue completely destroyed in one fell swoop, always happy to do that.